Welcome in, everyone, to a very special episode of American Joyride. I am joined by Mike Burke. He is a former Army Ranger, and he is here to tell us a lot about a lot of different topics. I'm very excited to have him as a guest. Mike, thanks for being here.
Hey, I really appreciate you having me on, David. And it's always good to sit down with a fellow podcaster. I find that those interviews and those kind of episodes are usually the best. They're the most fun. But also, I definitely want to, just take a moment, if you don't mind, and thank you for what you're doing. Um, there's a lot of people out there kind of recording the history of the GY, in the last, 30, 40 years of everything that's happened, in our country and our, Department of Defense. And, some people will say, well, there's some out there that maybe ain't doing it great. One, you're not one of those. You're doing a great job. I've listened to a lot of your episodes. I think, what you're capturing is great. But also on top of that is I would give anything to go back and be able to do that with the World War I, World War II, Korean War veterans, even the Vietnam veterans, and we could still catch some of them. But to be able to sit down and do interviews like this, there's some out there. We've all seen the Band of Brothers and everything else, but that's one company, that has a TV series about it. What about all the other companies? What about the untold stories? But then also there's another aspect of it as well, is every time we do this, right, wrong, or indifferent, I don't care how anybody's doing it, we are making it more comfortable to talk about this kind of stuff and to talk about the good times, the bad times, the difficult times, all that stuff in between, which reduces stigmas. We know for a fact there's a lot of World War II, Korean War, Vietnam, and everything else, and World War I veterans that just didn't come back and talk about it. I never, there's countless uncles and grandpas and everything else that are like, they never ever told me about the war, not one thing, and what we don't know is what was the repercussions of that. Broken families, broken spirits, lost jobs, suicides, all this different kind of stuff, because we weren't really talking about that kind of stuff back then. We're talking about it now, and we're going to prevent it from happening in the future, one episode at a time. So thank you for what you're doing.
I appreciate those incredibly kind words. That was an awesome way to open this. And I think we're going to touch on what you just said there about guys talking and opening up a little later in the interview, because that is a topic that people have varying feelings on. Is it okay to talk? Is it not okay to talk? What can we talk about? What shouldn't we talk about? Especially guys that come from your sector of the military, where you're talking Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, guys who see the violence, the real stuff. So we are going to get into that, and I'll be very curious to pick your brain. But before we get into that, let's rewind a little bit back to your early background. Like I said in the intro, you were an Army Ranger for a long time. How did you find yourself in the Army Rangers?
So I did have one relative that was in the military. He was also an Army Ranger, very short-lived kind of time, but what it really came down to me for me is I knew I was going to do something different, because I knew staying in my hometown, which is a very, very small town, there wasn't a lot of options. There wasn't a lot of opportunities and ways to kind of, make a better life for yourself. There's nothing against, people that work on oil rigs, do, that kind of stuff, or, farming or ranching. Like, those are all things that we need. I just knew that I wanted to do more with my life. And so the military was the easiest option. I wasn't very smart. College was definitely not something that I was going to do. It took me many years to gain the maturity to be able to actually do that. So the military was the easy option. And then on top of that, I knew if I was going to join the military, I just didn't want to do kind of the status quo thing. I wanted to do something that was, harder and better. So Ranger Regiment was that option.
What year? This is pre 9/11. You're in the Rangers before 9/11 happened. So when you get to the Rangers, obviously the GWAT changes, training, it changes the mentality. We're at war for 20 years. But when you get there, was it the late 90s?
Yeah, it was 1998. Yep.
So when you get there in 98, was there really any idea that we got to be ready for combat, intense combat around the clock? And the reason I ask that is I've interviewed some Black Hawk Down veterans who are Army Rangers. And the one, they always talk about the peacetime army. It's like we signed up, we were in the peacetime army. We didn't really expect, Mogadishu to happen, and it did. For you, what was kind of that feeling like in 98?
Yeah, so my experience in Ranger Regiment is a lot different than a lot of guys what I've found. Obviously, I run a podcast where I sit down and I ask guys the same thing, that you're asking right now about their time in the 75th Ranger Regiment. And it was not a good experience. And we were not focused on training. We weren't focused on war. And this is my platoon. There was other elements that I felt, other platoons, other companies and everything else that were kind of different. But no, really, we weren't. And you couple that with the fact of, we're coming to the end of a Democratic president. Money was a huge issue. Like when I showed up, they were like, "Oh, hey, we spent pretty much all the fiscal year money already for like one rotation, one trip." So we just walked in the woods like all the time. Like, and we didn't even go to ranges. We didn't even have like blank ammo. The first real exercise was like 5 months after I got to regiment. We did a GRX down in Florida, and that was the first time like I actually had ammo. I actually loaded ammo. We jumped and we did all this different kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, this is a little bit different. This is actually what I joined the military to do, and especially a Ranger Regiment. And so part of it was my leadership, but also it's just a little bit of the times. But that morphed over time, not necessarily because of, hey, we think something's going to happen. Just honestly, it was just the leadership and the mentality that they had. We got some leaders after an event happened in my platoon that came from other elements within the battalion. And then even my platoon sergeant, he came from 175, and 175 was very different back then. And they changed our mentality. One of the, and I talk about him all the time. Josh Wheeler was my squad leader, and he was always pounding in our head, like, hey, every training, every time we do PT, every single thing that we do, we need to do it like it's the last time before we go to war. It wasn't because he had this premonition. It's just he knew that that was the job of the military. Like, we got to be prepared at all times. That's what we're supposed to do.
Well, and let's get into Josh Wheeler up front because you did
All
bring
right.
him up. Josh Wheeler, to the viewers, many of know who he is. He's a former Army Ranger, went to Delta Force, was killed in what is a very famous hostage rescue mission where Pat Payne won the Medal of Honor and Josh
Well,
KIA got the Silver Star. Could you tell our audience what your memories of just Josh as a human, Josh as a guy, like what was Josh Wheeler like?
Josh is probably one of the most influential people in my entire life as far as the military and being a man. There's a few other Bernie Felino and Chuck Albertson also are definitely up there, but Josh Wheeler was huge. And the reason is stuff that I already talked about. He came over to our platoon. He was my squad leader. Another great ranger, Casey Casmat, who was killed with Blackhawk when he was there. We were team leaders together. And our initial impression of Josh Wheeler was not good because he literally came into, at the time, we had a barracks room on the bottom floor. That's where all the NCOs were. And Casey and I shared a room. And Josh came in. I don't even remember. It was like 4:30 in the morning. Kicked open our door and said, "Team leaders are up before everybody else. What the hell are you guys doing in bed?" And I remember Casey. He leaned over. He like rolled over and he's like, I ain't gonna fucking make it with this dude. Like it's 4:30 in the goddamn morning. And anyway, we got up and that was just Josh, man. He was super intense. It mattered. Every day mattered. Every training, it didn't matter. There was no downtime. If we had time, we needed to be doing something, weapons maintenance, training, CQB, glass drills, vehicle searches, any kind of battle drill, knock out a bunker, anything like, you don't need ranges to do this stuff. You have the quad, you have vehicles in the back parking lot. Like you can practice this stuff all the time. PT, if we're not, doing training, like let's do 2-a-days, run in the morning, hit the gym in the afternoon. Um, and at first, it was so different than what I was used to. I was very turned off by it. But, just to add a little bit credence to it, prior to Josh coming, I was the guy with the calendar on the wall. Literally, you know, 265 days till I'm out of the army. Like I could not wait to get out of the army. Like it was a done deal. Like, and then, you fast forward 6 months later, I'd re-enlisted. I was a newly promoted sergeant. And I couldn't imagine doing anything else with my life. And this is, rolling into, 2000 into 2001, and But that wasn't just all Josh was. Josh also was somebody that, I did a lot of stuff in my off time with. We went hiking, we went mountain biking, we remodeled my kitchen, remodeled his kitchen together. He had kids at the time. I didn't have kids at the time when we first met. Like we did everything together. And he was always like that, like always just a man on a mission, always a man on a task, let's do chores, so he taught me a lot of stuff, and I mean, I'm from the backwoods of Montana, so, but his just mentality about stuff was very, very different. Like, I remember spending an entire block leave, treeing, cutting down trees in his backyard and my backyard and laying grass in my entire backyard, remodeling the entire kitchen and redoing part of my fence, that got burnt and all this stuff. Like, we spent the entire block leave doing it, together and, just going in between our houses. Like we spent a lot of time together and, I seen how he, interacted with his kids and his wife and, and then just Rangers. And it was very different than anything I'd ever experienced. And it made me go, okay, this is the man that I want to emulate. This is the man that I want to be like. And then as you know Josh more and more and you realize where he came from, one, he came very poor. Had I think 3 or 4 sisters or brothers that, he used to work, he was terrible at school, but, he used to take any odd job that he could. He would, kill deer, so that they had food on the table, but like he was the man of the house. I don't remember if he was the oldest or not. I can't remember that, but he was definitely like the provider for his family. And then, join the Army again as a means to avoid mediocrity, but also to make money so he could send it back to his family, to his mom and stuff like that, and his sisters and brothers. And he actually didn't go to Ranger Regiment, and a lot of people don't know that. He was actually at 25th ID, and he saw, and he tells a story, he told me a story that basically saw like Rangers running down the road. So he's like, who are these guys? And he like broke off from his formation, like getting yelled at by his squad leader and everything else. And he was trying to keep up with these Rangers, like run with him because he's super competitive guy. Like I've watched that guy like run himself till he almost died just because he was trying to keep up with somebody, doing whatever it was, carrying a log or whatever it was. Cause we used to always just do, kind of crazy things. And he couldn't keep up with them. And he like damn near killed himself trying to keep up with these guys. And so when he got back and he linked up, he's like, "Who are those guys? Like who are those guys? Those are the Rangers down the street because we were right up the street from them. 25th ID. That's where they used to be." And he's like, "I want to do that." And I can't remember if he went to Ranger school before Ranger Regiment or not. I can't remember that, but it wasn't very long after that he was in Ranger Regiment. So he actually was an import.
And did you deploy with him once the war started?
Yeah. So yeah, 2001, we were in Germany doing a training exercise when September 11th happened. And I remember it. And I mean, obviously everybody remembers September 11th. They remember where they were. We were actually getting ready to deploy into the box into GMRC. So we're outside like in Hohenfeld, and it was actually a really nice day. It was a really beautiful day, and so we're outside, which is unusual in Hohenfeld. Hohenfeld's like it's just like any other NTC rotation or GMRC rotation. The weather's always shit, and it was actually a really nice day. And we're outside, 0 miles gear. XO comes out and says, "Hey, a plane hit the World Trade Center," and we're like, "Oh, that's freaking weird!" Like, holy shit, that's a kind of a random thing. Then comes out again, a few minutes later and says, "Hey, another plane hit the other World Trade Center." And then, then everybody's like, "Okay, hey, we're," and that's when the conversation started. We're under attack, like all this different kind of stuff. So we started, packing up miles gear. We're like, we're going to war. Like America's at war, we're at war. And then, so we're like thinking, okay, there's no way we're going to go into the box. We're going to be doing something very different. And not long after, a couple hours later, they're like, "Nope, hey, you're still going into the box." And obviously everybody was pretty frustrated, pretty disappointed. But we got packed up, we got loaded up, we loaded on 5 tons. They dropped us off in the woods. And what's funny about it now, like thinking about it now, is what I realize is that everybody was like scrambling and probably like glued to TVs and all this different kind of stuff. So they literally just dropped us off and told us to walk into the woods and wait, like set up patrol bases and wait, And we're like, screw that. Josh was like, screw that. We're not doing that. So we literally like walked in the woods. We put a bunch of ponchos together because it started raining, of course, you're in the box. So of course it's going to start raining. And, we all sat around as a squad, literally. And one of my guys, one of my saw gunners, had one of those Red Cross wind up radios. You remember those? And we're trying to listen to the news. And I think we managed to get in AFN, but not like very well. So we couldn't really understand what was going on. Like a little bit, we were catching bits and pieces. And eventually we just kind of gave up on that. And Josh, so we're just sitting there and we're talking about it. And I remember Josh, and I actually just talked to Sergio and I forgot to ask him about this, but Sergio Chiparez, which was one of my 203 gunners, he was a teacher in his previous life before joining the military. He basically, Josh said, hey, everybody, basically give like a paragraph of what you're thinking right now, and, Serge, write it down, and so we did. And I would love to reread those. One, because there's 3 individuals that were there at that time that are now dead. So I'd love to see what they had to say. But then also, I just love to think of kind of like the mentality, the nativity of youth, of what we were thinking at those times. And then we went into the rotation, and yeah, it was interesting. It was very hard. And they tried to like change the scenario. And this just tells you like how stupid everybody was back then. They tried to change the scenario because they're like, you're going to go to the Middle East, because now that's where everybody's focused on. And so all the role players were Arabic speakers. They like changed them, from East European, Russian, role players to like Middle Eastern, role players was what they were trying to do, but it was Arabic. And it was like, well, I don't fucking speak Arabic in Afghanistan, So, it's just one of those things. But yeah, so in 2002, sorry, I kind of long way of going around. In 2002, 375 deployed, 175 deployed. Roberts Ridge happened, and then about a month later, after Roberts Ridge, 275 went on the first deployment. I was with Josh on that deployment.
And if you wouldn't mind, what was Josh like in combat?
Yeah, so that first deployment, honestly, so we fly into the island, prior to going to Afghanistan. And I mean, Josh was super intense. And I actually just recently shared a picture of us, in the desert camo and everything else. And, just Josh, because he's, an intense guy. We took a squad photo, and everybody's face is super somber in that photo. And it's because Josh, right before we snapped that picture, he said, all right, let's take a squad picture real quick, because we're probably all not going to come back alive. you know, and I'm like, oh shit. So everybody's face is super somber. But we get off the island, and Josh is like, I remember us landing, and he's like, all right, everybody keep their weapons on them. When we get off, we're gonna get into formation, like everybody needs to have their eyes open and all this stuff. Cause we didn't actually know where we were landed. Everything was very, very, kind of secretive back then. And then we get off and we realize we're at an Air Force resort. People are walking around in fucking bikinis, out tanning, like there's a bar, there's like a canteen, all this different kind of stuff. And they literally told us like, hey, once you get to your tents, ground all your weapons, ground all your kit, everything else, don't carry that stuff around because it'll scare people. And we're like, we're in a war zone. And then we realized like, no, you're actually not in a war zone, And then I don't know, we actually weren't there very long. My squad wasn't. For some reason on that first deployment, we got attached to 3rd Platoon a lot. For a lot, I don't really totally know the reasons, but my squad went, C-130 over to Afghanistan. And then, that's when, okay, we're like, hey, we're really going into Afghanistan. We're going into Bagram. But that deployment, by and large, outside of like a few incidents, was pretty benign. There wasn't really a lot. We took like indirect once, and like maybe there was like some gunshots like off of the distance, but Josh never let us like let our guard down. Yeah, sure, we would have times where we'd sit around and play spades or something like that. But, Josh was always like, hey, we're going to go out and patrol. We're going to do all kinds of stuff. We're going to train. We're going to keep on training. We're going to keep on doing PT. We're going to improve, because his big thing was always chores, like, man, we're going to get up and do chores, so do PT, eat breakfast. And then now we're going to spend the day, part of the morning doing chores, so we'd be, sandbags, concertina wire, all different kinds of stuff, So he was intense, but at the same time, he did have a calmness, you know, when things did go sideways, like, because there was multiple incidents, you know, where, we, where we didn't know, like, we were going through like villages and stuff like that, you just don't know what you don't know, and, he was always calm. He was a very, very calm guy. He's very direct. Um, but, as far as a tactician goes, there's none better.
I had the opportunity to interview his squad leader or squadron leader at when he went to Delta Force,
Yeah.
and that guy told me, and I'm telling you this because I think that you'll appreciate it. He said one of the things that always fascinated him about Josh Wheeler was when they'd go into the kill house and do
Yeah.
like the CQB training, he just would constantly be laughing. Like he'd be
Yeah.
running these drills and
Oh
he'd be
yeah.
laughing his ass off while
Oh yeah.
blowing things away. And his former squadron leader said, he's like, I hope that when he died, he was smiling because that's how he would have wanted it. And he was this is his squadron leader said, Josh Wheeler was a larger than life figure in an organization where everyone is a
Yeah.
larger than life figure. He was elevated above virtually all of them. So I really appreciate you taking some time to remember. Josh, do you remember where you were when you heard that he'd been killed?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Um, I was in Fort Hunter Liggett. I was a first sergeant in Charlie Company, 275, and we were doing validation exercises before deployment. And so we were doing a brief, and so the brief, as we were getting ready to, go out and do the first series of, targets and stuff like that, all our phones are outside, on the security point and everything. So we do the brief, and I come up, and it was one of my guys actually at the security point. He goes, "Hey, first sergeant, your phone's been blowing up." And I'm like, "Oh shit, okay, great." I'm like, I don't have that many guys on rear D. Like, god dang it, like what the hell's going on? So I like pick up my phone, and I see I have multiple missed calls from guys in the unit. I'm like, oh shit, like I know where this, because you just know like there's a reason behind that. So I call Chris Frost, who's a great friend of mine, great buddy of mine, that I've known forever. So I call him back, and all I said was who, and he goes Josh, and I instantly went, which one, because I do know quite a few Joshes, and he goes Josh Wheeler, and I don't quite frankly know what I said. I don't even know if I hung up the phone with him. I can't quite remember. Because I mean, we've all lost friends. We've all lost, people important to us, especially in this profession. But, just like that squadron commander, talked about, there's people that are larger than life, and then there's people that are a cut above. Well, for Josh and for many of us, there was Josh dying was not possible. Like, there's no way Josh could die. Like, and I know, I mean, I don't want to sound like ignorant. I don't want to sound like childish, because I mean, that's the reality of the work that we do. But we really, really felt that way, because I've seen Josh like almost die, like numerous times. Like, there's no way that Josh could die. And, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again. And I'm not sure if I'm totally, you probably just asked one question, but I'll go into it if you don't mind. Is I instantly went into, okay, I got to let other people know. So I started making phone calls. I started telling people, hey, Josh is dead. I don't know much. All this different kind of stuff. And the last call that I made was to somebody I've already referenced before, Sergio Chiparez, and it just all kind of finally just like caught up with me in that moment. And when I called Sergio, I couldn't talk. Like, I was crying, like, and I was, and again, I don't know. I mean, he told me like, you got it out, but because I've talked to him since, but he's like, I was worried. Like, he's like, I was devastated just like you were, but I was worried because I've never seen you like that. And the next 2 days, man, I'll tell you, and it was very, very bad time to not be in your element, not be functional, but I was not functional as a first sergeant, because we're going through a training exercise, And good thing is I had phenomenal platoon sergeants and a company commander that I'll love to the day I die. John Stahaley, Lieutenant Colonel John Stahaley, is currently a 191 commander over in Graf, Germany. They covered for me pretty much. And finally, you know, I went and I talked to the chaplain, and you know, it was the start of me working through shit that I hadn't worked through, you know, in a long time, going all the way back to my childhood. And you know, so bringing this, you know, this kind of, you know, to a head right here is I like to think that in Josh's death, um, you know, he saved my life one last time. Because had I not done that, I don't know where I would be. I was a pretty messed up individual. Like I had packed away years, decades of trauma and issues and everything else. And I finally got like help, and I finally did the things that I needed to do to work through those problems and to come to um, terms with a lot of things. But it took that. And it sucks that it took that. Quite frankly, I wish Josh was still with us, and you know, life would have went the way it went for me. I would give anything to be able to call Josh right now. And I think about that fucking daily. I would love to be able to talk to him, even if it's just some random, you know, email that I would get from him when he was traveling the world, talking about, you know, his escapades up in Norway or whatever it was, you know, because, and I say that because that was like the last email exchange we had was he was up in Norway. So, which was a couple months prior to that. So,
Well, I
yeah.
think on behalf of not just the viewers, but the country, I think it's important people realize that Joshua Wheeler exists. They are more than willing to pay the price, sacrifice that they do, and this country is better off for it. And if people don't know his story, I can't encourage you enough to Google it, read about it wherever you can, watch interviews like this one, because Josh Wheeler was a great American, and we're not going to forget him no matter how many years go by. So I cannot thank you enough. And we're going to get into a lot of things you just mentioned, but I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to really shine a light on the legacy of Joshua Wheeler. Next, I want to pivot because you did kind of touch on Afghanistan, but really I want to get into Iraq with you. So do you go right away in the invasion in 2003?
Yeah, so we came back from the Afghanistan deployment, and then, you know, very rapidly started gearing up. And we didn't, you know, I didn't know it at the time, but we were actually training, we were doing stuff in preparation for Iraq. You know, probably within like 4 months of getting back from the Afghanistan deployment. Um, you know, because we were preparing, you know, and yes, we actually were the first element on the ground in RR, which was a staging area prior to going to Iraq. And it was my platoon and all of ACO that actually went. So it was 4 platoons. And, you know, that would be cool, like to say we were the first ones there, but literally all we did for 3 weeks was put up tents. Like, I'm not talking like a few tents, like hundreds of tents. I mean, we literally were doing competitions to put up tents, like the GP mediums. I mean, because they ended up putting up thousands of them. You know, we were there before the D cell guys. We were there before like any of the structural engineers. I mean, there was literally no one there. It was an open desert.
And so you're there for 3 weeks, you're setting up tents. At what point does your platoon, like you said, the rest of A company, at what point do you guys start pushing inward?
Yeah, so there was a few like cross-border you know, missions that happened. And they were doing, you know, kind of preparation stuff for the berm, you know, so there's a big berm around Iraq, especially in that southern portion. You know, so there was a few things that happened. And then obviously, you know, Delta Force, they went across first, you know, and I think elements of the SAS and everything else went first, right after A-Day, you know, right after the bombardment. And obviously, you know, A-Day, you know, got delayed a bunch of times, you know, it was supposed to start and everything else. But that'll always kind of strike me, like I'll always remember that for two different reasons. One reason is being able to stand up on ISU 90s and literally watching the war happen. You know, bombs being dropped in it, because I mean it's not that far. You can actually see it, you know. So and then also going to the chow hall and watching it unfold on TV. and that was super intense knowing that like how close we were, and all this stuff's happening. But so the plan was we were going to jump into Baghdad, Bayap, Bayap International Airport. So we did, pre-combat, obviously all the inspections, airborne rehearsals, all that different kind of stuff, shoots, and chalks were laid down. I think we had some QRF stuff that we were doing also just in preparation. I don't remember. I'm sorry. I don't remember if we ended up actually going out anywhere on QRF. We might have. I really honestly don't remember. It's not substantial enough for me to remember anything. But anyway, what the plan was, we were going to jump in, and then obviously 3ID, our third ID, rolled in quicker, and met the resistance at Bayap and pretty much, took care of that resistance. And so as soon as they did that, then we, got on helicopters, planes, and everything else, and basically did a forcible entry, minus a jump on Bayap. And then, and I don't remember how many days that was after 8A. It was kind of a wild time back then, but I mean, it was definitely within a couple days. I know because we were still getting calls that they were still clearing trenches, and then, 175, they were, or I'm sorry, 375 and 175, they were jumping, on the airfields and everything else.
When you get to Baghdad, by the time you get there, is there much resistance of Saddam's loyalist forces left, or they pretty much fled and or been crushed at that point?
So not in Bayab, but in the city of Baghdad, yeah, absolutely. And that's where we're hunting and we were going and we were acting on any bit of human intelligence, insignificant intelligence, in and around the city and all over the city. Because, not only we were trying to take out, the armed forces, but then also, all the Ba'ath members and, his son, number 1 and 2, so, and many of those guys that were there, they'll remember the deck of cards. So we all had a deck of cards that had all the faces of the Ba'ath members, and I think it was, you know, I don't remember. Actually, I probably have that deck somewhere. I'm pretty sure I do, but his son were like 2 or 3 or something like that. They might have been like the queen or the king or something like that. I don't quite remember how it worked. So
My old boss was a Bush administration official, and they gave him the deck of cards, and then he had it framed with
that's
all
smart.
with all
Yeah,
52 cards, and it was
that's
hanging in his
beautiful.
office. It was incredible to
Yeah,
just
I need to
look
look.
at. When you so at what point? Well, I guess let me ask one quick question before you go into the invasion. This is about to be the biggest invasion that the
Mhm.
United States has conducted since World War II. What were your feelings like? Were you excited? Were you nervous? Were you scared? What was going through your head before this thing kicked off?
So honestly, it was pure excitement, and the reason being is because Afghanistan was really. I don't. I'm always careful to say this because we've lost so many people in Afghanistan, and even on that deployment, American soldiers got killed as well. Not Rangers, but Afghanistan was kind of a letdown for that first deployment. We didn't really do a lot. We were honestly just, setting up new fobs and doing this stuff and doing a lot of patrols, but there really wasn't much, that deployment, that specific deployment. After kind of Roberts Ridge, there was kind of a point. There was kind of a mute point for a while in Afghanistan. Um, so it was excitement because, everybody, wants to go to war, and we didn't really kind of get that, what we thought war was going to be like in Afghanistan. So for this deployment, we're like, this is different, and just knowing, I mean, because the truth is, we knew we were part of something big. We knew this was huge. I mean, you could tell just by the amount of people that were rolling into RR. I mean, every minute, C-17, C-5s, civilian, ginormous freaking planes, jumbo jets are landing every, single minute nonstop, just bringing in people, cargo and munitions and tanks and all this different kind of stuff. And you're just watching this stuff. I mean, we would literally just sit there, ISU 90s and stuff like that. And like bird towers we met, we'd just sit there and watch the airfield, and just, I mean, C5 pulling up and them just rolling tanks off the back. You're like, shit, and it was pretty amazing, so it was excitement. There was definitely a couple missions that we did, that deployment where there was a lot of fear. Jessica Lynch mission being one. And that was just because of like the intelligence and everything that we were being told, leading into that. But there was definitely moments, but for the most part, it was a lot of excitement. Like I'm here in this moment, I'm part of this, and extension of the American military.
We're going to get into Jessica Lynch, but before we do that, we're going to get into the Saddam's kids who are on the run. But I do have one question for you that I want to get off of the excitement. Do you remember the first time you pulled the trigger in Iraq, and did anything surprise you now that like bullets, like we're actually shooting at people, they're shooting at us? What was that first time like?
Yeah, so the first time was pretty anticlimactic, and it was honestly, I mean, and again, hindsight's, kind of a funny thing. Basically, a guy come out of his house and he did exactly what any one of us would do if we heard people outside of our house. We would come outside with a gun, you know? And this guy came outside of his house, with a gun. Oh, by the way, especially if you add in the fact that your country's being invaded, you know, and he came out, he got a couple rounds off, and then, that was the end for him. That was the first time. And then I just remember thinking, well, that was actually a lot easier than I thought it would be. That was pretty anticlimactic. I wonder what he was shooting at, because like nothing even came near us. And, we cleared the house. And, then afterwards, and I remember Chuck Alberson came up and he told me exactly that. He's like, hey, not trying to get in your head or anything else, but basically this guy was probably just protecting his house. And I was like, yep, shit. That's a fair point. This guy wasn't, a terrorist or, an Iraqi soldier or anything. He was just trying to protect his house. But I mean, that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, that's the chaos. You're not the first person to ever tell me a story of that general nature. When it gets to Saddam's kids, and I'm fascinated by this, I've always been fascinated by Saddam's
Yeah.
kids. They obviously take off just like their dad takes off when the war starts.
Right.
I mean, everyone on the deck of cards tried to go into hiding and or flee.
Yeah.
What was your unit's job? What's this manhunt like when it comes to Saddam's two kids?
So at the time, there was very limited helicopters. There was very limited Humvees. There wasn't a lot of mobility options. And obviously back then, we didn't have the understanding, and the maps and everything else. So like walking out of Biap really wasn't an option. So it was just chaos. Like literally, hey, we got this. We got this bit of intelligence. Where can we get a helicopter from? Where can we get vehicles from? Like, okay, hey, we can't literally, 175's got the vehicles up, they're doing something up north. We can't use the helicopters, because this unit's using them. Okay, what do we got? Oh, hey, third ID. Hey, what are you guys doing? Okay, hey, let's grab, a section of freaking Bradleys and piling in the back of the Bradleys, and just driving downtown Baghdad in the back, with a bunch of Rangers, which was crazy, in between their thunder runs and everything else. And I'll always have respect for those third ID guys, and I can tell you a little bit more why. But it was just madness, because there was just constantly intel coming down. We were paying people for intelligence. We were just getting all kinds of different information, and we were just going out and just trying to action them and find them and everything else. And there was plenty of times where the intelligence was good, but a lot of time we just felt like we were chasing ghosts. There was times where we would run into resistance and stuff like that. It just kind of honestly depended, and it was very sporadic. You had no idea where it was going to happen and when it was going to happen. And then also, like, you would literally, and this is things that a lot of people, if they weren't there during like that initial month, they would never know this. That Iraq invasion, like sometimes we'd just go, because we were also searching for chemical weapons too. So sometimes we would just go out and we'd have to, be in MOP level 5, freaking with everything, would roll onto some random lab or, presumed lab or something like that. We're searching for chemical weapons, and basically we're just escorting scientists that are going in and, testing everything while we stay outside. And the Iraqi people were unbelievable. I mean, literally like setting up picnics for us, just, extending their, gratitude for, basically liberating their country, people giving us cars, people, offering their daughters hands in marriage, like all this different kind of stuff, or, they would see us and we'd have a block lockdown or something like that. They'd be like, oh, the Americans are here. We can throw a party. And they literally start like a block party, playing music and, bringing out drinks and food and stuff like that. And you'd be like, dude, it's a war zone. They're like, this is nothing. You should try to live under Saddam Hussein. And we're like, fair point. Okay, I guess I wouldn't understand that. Like we can go outside, we can say whatever, they would come outside. I mean, literally, they'd be like, I can say whatever I want. I don't have to worry about it. Fuck Saddam Hussein. You're like, whoa, like, I mean, I'm literally, but it was only that month, there was about a month, period where it was like that. And then as we got to kind of know the area better and everything else, just like, you would do if you were a tourist, we found the good places to eat. So we would like roll back from missions and we'd stop like downtown, like by the food courts and stuff like that, and grab some chow, and freaking bring it back with us and everything else. Because like there was there was parts as we started to expand, out of BIAP that became safer and safer because, one, just the flood of Americans coming in and doing stuff, pushed everybody else out, any kind of resistance out. But two, we just, kind of started to understand the place better.
How close do you know how close you got to Uday and Qusay? Did you ever find out if you got close at all?
Yeah, so there was one mission, and I unfortunately, this is just kind of one of those weird ones that I mean, it probably wouldn't matter, but I won't talk about it too much.
Fair.
But
That's fine. That's fine.
yeah, there was one mission that was very weird. It was definitely different than anything we'd ever done. It was literally just my squad. And like we were told to we were on a mission. We were told to get on a Black Hawk. We flew on a Black Hawk. We landed in the middle of the desert. A freaking little Cessna with a bunch of weirdos and weird equipment landed, picked us up, flew us somewhere. Then another helicopter. Like it was this whole weird thing. And then eventually, not in Iraq, another country, we landed. And we're given some instructions and everything else about what to do to basically, reduce the threat there, and then basically set up ambush lines. And that's what we did. And from what I'm told, and then like afterwards, what we were told is that Uday and Qusay were in a vehicle convoy, basically, that were coming through there to try to cross the border. And they got stopped because of all of the aircraft and everything else that was flying around trying to get ahead of them. And they stopped somewhere in between there and got on different vehicles and buggied out. But like literally we were right in front of them and we were going to ambush them when they come across the border control checkpoint.
And then
into the other country.
Yeah, and I know the country you're referring to, but you don't want to mention it, so I won't mention it either.
Well, it honestly, it was just there's a couple different other elements that I kind of avoided from that like whole story and stuff like that. But that's just I'm pretty comfortable talking about most things, but that one's just one of those ones,
Yeah, fair enough. Totally fair. And then obviously, they ended up getting caught. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was Delta in the 82nd Airborne caught them, and they launched like a bunch of those what is it called, a tow missile?
Yeah, tow missiles, javelins. I think actually they were launching javelins into it too, and I think it was it was 375 82nd and Delta Force. Yeah,
and they hammered them in that building they were in. I mean, yeah, they didn't last long against the element that finally found them. Now Jessica Lynch, and I cannot wait when you sent the email saying that you were involved with Jessica Lynch. And here's the reason why. I remember, I'm 31 years old. I'll be 32 here soon enough. So I wasn't that old when the Iraq war kicked off, but I was old enough to, I watched the news with my parents at night. Like I was very aware of what was going on. And I just remember the Jessica Lynch thing was on the news all the time. And it was this young, blonde female soldier. She's been taken POW, and you hear all these horror stories, and then the rescues on the news. And it was it was a nightly event. And then, as I'm sure then the initial reports that I remember were that there was this massive gunfight and they faced intense resistance and they pulled off this insane hostage rescue mission. The Bush administration essentially promotes that narrative. And then you start seeing people come out and say, that's not at all what happened. Andy Stumpf, who was on SEAL Team 6 there, said that was not his recollection of how things went down. So once and for all, what was the Jessica Lynch rescue mission actually like?
So, leading up to it, and I talked about this before, we were told, and the intelligence we were given was that there was Marines in the area, and I don't remember the side, you know, our size. I don't remember if they said a battalion, a division, brigade. I really honestly don't remember, but that was trying to basically seize that city and couldn't. They met such heavy resistance that they got pushed back, and they basically pushed out. And the best that they could do was basically try to lock it down so that no one could get out of there. So they were outside of it, like basically trying to lock down the city so that no one could get out of the city, right? Um, so that was the intelligence we were given. And I mean, straight up, like, and I told you this, like, we were packing ammo. I mean, I remember looking, and this is another squad. This is a guy named Matt Nyman. I looked over at his 203 gunner and I was like, dude, that guy's not even going to be able to function. Like, he literally had something like, 50 to 60 rounds of 203 on him. I'm like, dude, you got it. Like, I got it. Like, you want to be prepared, but that dude's not even going to be, he can't even lift up his rifle. Like, he's got so much shit on him. But we were told, like, hey, you're going into the firefight of the century. The Marine, element literally got pushed out of the city because the fire, there was so much armed resistance in this city. So we're like, oh shit, okay, and so, I told you, I mean, I remember sitting with my team, and we've laughed about this so many times since. And I'm like, listen, you know, sorry, this is funny. I'm like, I love you guys. Like, you are my brothers. Like, I will never forget you. If anything happens to me or happens to you, like, we'll carry on your name. Like, I mean, and like, my 203 gunner, he's, tough dude, but very sentimental kind of guy, because he was older. We're dumb. We're young. He was older. And he, I remember him like crying, like, I fucking love you guys, and all this shit. But anyway, so we land on C-46s, which are the Marine helicopters that are made. They're smaller than 47s. They're made to land on aircraft carriers and boats and stuff like that. If I get the terminology wrong, I'm not in the Navy, so piss off. But anyway, and we land, and immediately it's a shit show. We land in like this giant landfill, and we're like crawling out like through like the helicopter like sank, then like went through emergency procedures to hover so that they didn't sink into this trash. And they're like, get out. Like, and we jump, and you're like expecting to hit the ground, and you land in trash, and you're like sinking, and you're like trying to swim out of this. And we have all this ammo because we all took a lot of extra shit. Finally, we make it out of it. And it just got worse from there. And the reason is because electricity, trash services, all this stuff had been shut off for so long. And now also because the Marines had pretty much laid siege to this city. Sewer, trash, everything overflowing on the streets. So yes, we were in the shit, but it wasn't the shit. And as in a firefight, it was literal shit. And there's story after story of people falling in open sewers and tripping and falling and all this stuff. And what's even funnier is the ROE we were given. The ROE we were given going into that target was, if they have boots on, you can shoot them. So we would go into rooms because we're clearing this stuff, because we're basically like converging on this city, trying to lock down the hospital. While was it 375 or was it 175? 175 was coming in to lock in the hospital itself. And so we're going, building to building, clearing, and guys would come into rooms, and they would, when they would see they didn't have a weapon, they would shine at their feet looking for boots. But anyway, I think there was like literally like, for 275's part, there was one guy that was shot, and it was because like he was basically like silhouetted like up, on a second story, and came out, and it legitimately looked like he was holding something. I don't remember if it was a gun. It might very well have been a gun, but there was literally no firefight. The worst thing that really kind of happened was, well, 175, they locked down the hospital, they unlocked the hospital. They linked up with the doctor or janitor or whoever it was, were showing where Jessica Lynch is. And then when SEAL Team 6 landed on the roof, 175 was like, hey, just go over there. She's right there on the, on the third door to the right, and I don't know if Rangers like even actually saw her before, but they were probably told like, hey, the Navy SEALs need to rescue her or whatever it was. I don't totally remember. But the worst thing that really kind of happened on that mission is 175 having to dig up the gravesite. And the guys that talk about that, it's a very traumatic thing. So the entire crew and everything that was with Jessica Lynch, and I don't want to, sit here and try to, steal their thunder. That's their story to tell. I just want to kind of highlight, guys like Huma Barnett that have talked, told me about it. But having to dig up that gravesite was pretty bad because they needed to recover the remains, but these people had been, buried for a long period of time, so they were decomposing and everything else. It was pretty traumatic. It was pretty bad. It was the right thing to do, is what needed to happen. But a lot of those guys had to do that. It was definitely a terrible thing.
Oh, I can't even imagine. I didn't realize that it happened. I didn't know that they got the bodies of the other people.
Yeah.
On this subject. I mean, I don't know if you know, Jessica Lynch ended up testifying in front of Congress about what had actually happened during the shootout that she was taken POW in, and then the hospital. Why do you think the story of Jessica Lynch, by her own admission, was twisted and changed so dramatically to include things that she openly admits never happened?
Listen, 12 guys can step into a firefight and there'll be 36 different stories. They'll face a 5-armed combatant, but somehow 29 people died. It's just, well, I mean, on her part. Okay. And, I know people, say a lot of different things about her. Listen, like, she was, the rank she was told the things that she was told, like things, did not go the way that she probably envisioned them going or hoped that they would go. And she didn't want to be captured, and imagine how intense that was for any one of us to be taken captured. Okay. Like, imagine being captured by the enemy. Okay. But now imagine being captured as a woman.
Right.
In an Islamic country, okay, where women's lives are less valuable. They just are. Women are property. Women are very different than men are viewed, Oh, an American woman, by the way. Like, so, it's hard. There probably was a gunfight in her eyes because they were probably throwing flashbangs. I don't remember, but they were probably throwing flashbangs. And I'm sorry, untrained observer, a 9-banger flashbang sounds like a gunshot. It sounds like rapid fire. Who knows? And the entire narrative being the way it was, man, there was so many things happening during these times. Because I mean, like, this is a big day for her. She was rescued, but this was like a 26-hour event for most of us, in a 5-month deployment for, at least my platoon. It was 5 months. I mean, it was a big deal because we were rescuing an American, but there were a lot of shit that happened, and so, the narrative itself, I don't want to sit here and say, that people love to just exaggerate, but things get exaggerated in your mind, and we'll tell another story, that that one's probably not as exaggerated because it doesn't need to be. But what's funny is I've heard people tell that story that weren't even there. And, there's always, little additions that are added in over time.
What story are you talking about now?
It was, you wanted to talk about the Iraqi brigade.
Yeah, well, let's pivot.
Yeah.
Well, this is a perfect segue. Let's get into the Iraqi tank brigade.
Yeah. Well, it was actually the Kurdish, but, well, hold on. Let me, so my point being is things do just, in our minds and everything else, they do just kind of get exaggerated. Listen, at the end of the day, she was an American soldier deployed to a foreign country doing something that was incredibly important. She was taken captured by the enemies of her country. Everybody else but her died. That alone deserves her any kind of recognition, any kind of prestige that can be afforded her. She deserves that, and she doesn't just deserve it for herself. She deserves it for the, comrades that died to her left and right. So if we embellish some stories, There was maybe a little bit more gunfire than there actually was. Oh well, it's okay. She's an American hero at the end of the day. So yeah, so if you want to dive into the Kurdish, this is many years later. Okay, so this is 2007. Yeah, 2007. Veterans Day 2007. Hill 666 as it's commonly called, or Veterans Hill. It has a lot of different names. Just a mission like any other mission. We did an offset infill. Meaning so an offset infill is where we just land off the target, 3 to 5K, so they can't hear the helicopters coming in, and then we walk in silently. And we were walking in and we saw that there was a big hill, like kind of off to the left. And, I'm platoon sergeant at the time. This is Bravo Company 275 and second platoon. And I told him, hey, let's just like take a wide berth around the hill. We don't need to walk right by the hill. So, we start skirting to the right. And, as we get close to the hill, an ISR, for whatever reason, normally we had multiple usual platforms, but for whatever reason, we were only asking them to clear part of our route. And it was mostly we were just asking them to clear the route like near hardball, like when there was hardball and stuff like that. We weren't asking them to clear the open desert because, I mean, why would you, because we had limited platforms back then. So they were watching pretty much the target. So anyway, we walk and we get close to the hill and like one like rifle fire comes, in and lands like right in front of my team, my lead squad, our lead squad. And we're like, whoa, where the hell did that come from? So everybody kind of stops and then multiple rounds start coming from the hilltop. And we're like, whoa, what in the hell? So, my lead squad kind of, lays down, a little bit of fire and everything else. And then, we call in, the JTAC and all those guys that call in, the ISR, they're like, hey, we're taking gunfire, like troops in contact, all this different kind of stuff. So, they can't immediately, because, we're still, I think we'd just gotten off the helicopter. Maybe we would walk like half a K. It wasn't very far. We'd walked. And so it took them a minute to get into position so they could actually get eyes on this hilltop. But by this point, now machine guns are in play on top of the hill, PKMs, like, the fire is getting pretty intense. And my platoon starts moving around, basically getting into suppressive fire positions and everything else, launching 203s, all this different kind of stuff on top of this hill because the fire is getting pretty intense. And then the RPGs. And this was the first time we'd seen an RPG like this. We'd seen RPGs, but like an RPG, coming directly over your head, it was kind of the first time. And I remember it because it streaks overhead, this big orange bright light, right? And everybody stops shooting. We're like, what the hell is that? And then it lands behind us and explodes. We're like, RPGs, so everybody starts shooting and firing and stuff like that. And I maneuver with the Gustav team, get him into position. Because now we are close enough I can identify bunkers on top of the hill. And I'm like, holy shit, that's weird. So, we start launching Gustavs, into these bunkers and everything else. And, I don't remember how many rounds we had, but we had, we did, a couple like direct, and then we did a couple like on area bursts and all this stuff. I'm, yelling at the PL behind me, like, hey, get the JTAC. Like, we need to start, like, doing some call for fire missions on this hilltop and everything else. And, okay, so, we got RPGs coming in, we got PKMs coming in. My guys are freaking, laying the scunion. And then we see coming up a road behind us, a trail of Humvees coming. Like, oh, shit. Okay. They come up behind us and they're white light, just white light central. And they come up behind us. So now we got the hill right here. We're right here. And by the way, this is open desert. Okay. But the only things there is to hide behind are boulders like this size. Okay. They ain't very big. And then this convoy starts opening up with 50 cal and Mark 19 and everything else behind us. And they're shooting at us. So now we got this hilltop. Luckily, they're shooting over the top of us for the most part. So that's why we hadn't broke contact, because they were shooting behind us for the most part. But now we got 50 cal and all this other shit coming in from the other direction. Well, luckily, somebody in that convoy must have had like night vision, even though they were under white light. We start lasing them, and that only lasted like a few minutes. And then they're like, okay, that's like American forces. And they boot scoot and boogie out of there. We're like, thank God. Okay, at least we got that problem solved. Then the JTAC had a bright idea. He's like, okay, hey, I'm gonna do a low pass with the F-16s that had come into station. They checked into station as soon as we got troops in contact. So they do a low flyby, right? Sounds like a great idea. And we're trying to do like a show of force, like, hey, these are Americans, you know? Because, oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, back up. We realized that this was some kind of Iraqi base. And the reason we realized that is because of the tents and everything that was kind of behind. And we could see like 5 tons and Humvees and tanks. We could actually see tanks like parked. So we're like, okay, this is obviously American. So we'd realized, hey, it was friendly, you know, it was friendlies. So, you know, while we're laying suppressive fire, we kind of adjusted a little bit, you know, like we were just trying to kind of get them to stop, not necessarily like shoot and kill, like I stopped shooting Gustav and all this stuff. Like as soon as we realized it was American, we're like, okay, you know, well, what we thought was American, we're like, okay, stop shooting Gustav, all this different kind of stuff. 203 is we're just trying to kind of lay suppressive fire to get them to stop, right? Anyway, so sorry, I forgot that part. Been a while. F-16s do a low flyover. Well, because of all the RPGs and everything else being launched, it set off the flares. So now we've got F-16 diversionary flares coming over the top of us and illuminating us.
Oh,
and now the fire starts to get more accurate because now they can see us better. So that's when things got really, really squirrely. And I remember like sitting off to the side and 2 things crossed my mind. First one was I yelled back to the JTAC. I said, don't fucking do that again. And then the second thing is I told my medic who was sitting beside me, like, get ready. We're probably going to start taking casualties now because basically they'd adjusted and realized they were off target. Now they're shooting amongst guys. And I see guys like RPGs, you know, hit next to guys and guys getting, you know, thrown and all this different kind of stuff. We're like, okay, what in the fuck are we gonna do here? Because like breaking contact still wasn't a good idea because there was still fire and things coming, you know, our mortars and stuff like that coming from the other side of the hill, but landing behind us. So like coming about, you know, and obviously we're not gonna sit there and like, you know, do basically a flanking maneuver to try to take this hill because there was a lot of people behind this hill. So we're just like basically, you know, as the saying goes, stuck in between a rock and a hard place. And then it got worse. And we didn't see it at first. We heard it at first. And it was a giant train followed by a shockwave coming over our head. And again, we're like, what in the hell was that? It was the tanks. They had fired up the tanks and they were maneuvering on us to flank us. And so now we got tank rounds coming over the top of us and firing at us. And we're like, and I just remember, you know, you talk about, you know, you were talking earlier about Josh laughing, you know, in the end. I remember I'm like in like tucked in behind like this like little like rock pile with my PL and the JTACs like down at our feet. And I remember laughing, you know, being like, it can't get any worse. And then the JTAC going, are you kidding me? Tanks? Fucking tanks? You know. So we're tossing around ideas. Like we're thinking like, how in the hell are we going to get them to realize we're American, you know? Because we tried everything, you know, and nothing, everything just made it worse. You know, the flares, VS-17 panels, individual penguin flares. I mean, everything. It just made it worse. It made the fire more accurate. So we're like, you know, what are we literally going to do here? And lasers were, you know, completely ineffective. They obviously had no nods. And I don't remember, you know, Chad Jenkins, who is a PL, he says that I said it. I think he's full of shit. I don't think I'm that brilliant, so I definitely wouldn't have said it. Brandon Temple denies it. He was a JTAC. He says that he didn't say it either. So it's one of those things that'll just, we'll never know who really said it. But basically, somebody's like, basically said, land the Apaches in front of the tank. And sure as shit, these Apaches, bad mofo, man, came down on the road and landed right in front of the lead tank. And the pilot got out and ran up to the tank, climbed up, and basically said, hey, those are Mustino said, hey, those are Americans you guys are shooting at. It took a few minutes, you know, but basically it got relayed up and you know, the fire stopped. And we exfilled and got on helicopters and went home for the night.
that is
And
without a doubt one of the most insane stories that has ever been shared on this. I'm in a state of shock right now. Is that the fiercest like fire you had ever taken?
Definitely with the tank rounds. Yeah. With the tank. Cause I mean, I've taken, machine gun fire, RPG fire. Like I've definitely seen more. Like I definitely have. But the tank rounds, man, oh man, and I think of guys that have taken, 105 artillery fire and everything else, going back to like, Vietnam and Korean War and all that stuff and World War II. And, you talk about shell shock and stuff like that, where people become inoperable because of how much of that is coming in. I get it. I mean, it didn't even hit that close to us, but just it coming over and just the shock wave, like literally, I'm not kidding you, like just the shock wave, like pulling your helmet off, like, and, turning your ear pro and like pushing guys over. I mean, just the shock wave of it alone is unbelievably jarring. I mean, it was, it's hard to describe. Um, and I had a very rambunctious platoon. Okay. They were a bunch of meat eater, just the baddest mofos. Okay. Not a word was spoken on that helicopter ride back. And well, we all went to like, we literally immediately, like, everybody went to chow. I stopped by the jock, and got on the phone with the battalion commander. Actually called me, and I'll remember it to this day, and I'll have mad respect for this guy for a lot of different reasons. General Carilla, okay, current CENTCOM commander or CG. He literally called me and he said, "We fucked up. We didn't do our pre-check stuff and checking on friendly forces that were in the area, blue force check before. We didn't do a good enough job. We missed this." So this was actually an Iraqi infantry brigade with brand new Kurdish tanks that the Kurdish had just bought, and it was an entire Kurdish tank brigade. They literally just gotten them. And the SF team that was supposed to be there to, basically, control stuff and everything else and advise for them had decided like that night, like an hour before that whole event, to like do a supply run, basically, like to the nearest fob, because we weren't that far from like some fob or something. And so they weren't there. So yeah, they if they had been there, night vision, nods, radios, all this different kind of stuff, we could have talked to them. But I mean, my guys didn't talk like through chow. Like it was definitely. And then the next morning, I wake up and everything else, and they're like, "Oh, hey, we're just think we're gonna put you guys in like an off cycle for 24 hours." I'm like, "Absolutely not. Nope, nope. We need to do something tonight. Make up something. We need to get out the door." Like, my guys weren't shell shocked, but it was definitely jarring. And the unbelievable thing is we didn't lose one guy.
Well, that is
Yeah,
the I was
couple
waiting for
pieces
that.
of shrapnel, but nothing. Yep.
I was waiting for that shoe to drop in the story. It's a miracle that nobody got killed given the situation you found yourself in.
Yeah, it's wild. So they actually used it for a while. Somebody told me in the captain's career course, I believe, they used that as a vignette for a while, basically to show decision making progress or process and like how to de-escalate. And basically, the way it would go is guys would throw out options like, "Hey, here's how here's the scenario, but then hey, here's how you de-escalate it, and here's how you," and they would go, "Oh, they did that. Oh, they did that. Okay, hey, now that you haven't de-escalated, now a friendly convoy comes up behind you and adds to the reason. Okay, what are you going to do now? Try to de-escalate it. Okay, nope, none of that works. Now, hey, now you got tanks." And like literally, one of the instructors that was telling me this, he's like, not only could no one ever come up with what happened, the Apache landed on the road, but two, people couldn't believe that it actually happened and that no one died.
The whole thing, start to finish, is absolutely crazy. I mean, like I said, it's one of the best stories I've ever heard in 2 years of doing this.
I don't know about that, man. You've had some
It,
pretty amazing guests.
it's certainly up there without a doubt. I do want to ask you a question on your opinion of when you were fighting kind of regime loyalists compared to hardcore terrorists who might have come in from Africa or Jordan,
Mm.
or the fundamentalists. Did you view it differently when it came to that? Because one guy's a uniformed soldier fighting for his government's army. The other dude is, I mean, I hear the word a lot, animal, satanic. They'll saw someone's head off without second thought, suicide vest. Did you view those two things differently, or for you, did it make no difference?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And what I would say is, when you talk about, the Iraqi, kind of army as a whole, they were very, very quick to give up. For two different reasons. One, they knew it was over. They knew there was no like fighting the surge that was coming. Many of them were vets from the Desert Storm, and they saw the only thing that stopped us was us. They know we could have taken Baghdad, in a matter of days, and we moved faster this time. Um, so they were very, very quick to kind of give up. But the tactics themselves in the beginning, they definitely had better tactics. Because they did do training. It wasn't good training. They were very demoralized. They did not have a lot of money and all this different kind of stuff, and the state of equipment was absolutely abysmal. Um, so to be honest with you, it wasn't really anything that I was like, okay, yeah, hey, that's like a trained army. Okay. Now, but when we start talking about foreign fighters, though, and that story that I just told, that deployment and a half of another deployment, my platoon was a strike force for the foreign fighters out of Balad, meaning while we had strikers and we would do stuff in and around the area, there wasn't a lot really kind of around Balad, a lot of targets. But I mean, there was some, but it was nothing like real substantial as compared to like what guys had in Mosul or Tikrit or, Baghdad, even Baghdad and stuff like that. Like it wasn't as substantial. There was minor stuff, but we would be lucky if we would do like maybe 2 missions a week, like like right there in Balad proper, or kind of, and I can't remember the other town that was a little bit south of it. We were the primary helo package for the strike forces. So, because the helos were based there, and so when Delta wasn't using them, we were using them, and so what that resulted in is we were the guys striking all the foreign fighters, not all the foreign fighters, but the ones that were training out in camps or coming across the borders, to go into these major cities and everything else. Um, and I will tell you, there was times where, it wasn't that big of a deal, but there was times where we would hit buildings and I'm talking, barricaded positions, secondary positions, ammo, grenades, all these different kind of stuff set up for a prolonged gunfight. They were prepared, centuries out for early warning systems, you know, uh, LPOPs, 2-man positions out, to, as early warning, but then also to, initiate with us before we got, up to the building and everything else. So the building could get, the people in the building could get prepared, for us to come and everything else. I mean, it was, and they were, just like you said, they were trained. They were trained, but more importantly, they were willing to die. It was actually prescribed. They were coming there to die. It was just a matter of how many people were they going to kill in the process of their death, and they were prepared to do that. And that's why you saw suicide vests. You saw, barricaded shooters. You saw all that different kind of stuff. They weren't running. Yeah, sure, you got squirters and stuff like that, but I'd be curious, and it'd be impossible for us to know this, but how many of those squirters were actually foreign fighters, or were just random people, most of them, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's plenty of those foreign fighters. Like everybody wants to be a gangster until it's time to do gangster shit, so they might have changed their mind, in amongst the firefight. But yeah, some of those foreign fighters, man, they were, yeah, I mean, I've told people this that, and I've, guy dying, and I'll always remember him. Guy dying. I think he got shot. But he basically on his last breath. And I remember that guy looking at me and two things: pure evil, pure unadulterated evil in that guy's face. And two, unbelievable hate in that guy's face, before he died.
Do you feel better about yourself? Is it easier to stomach the level of violence when you're fighting someone like you just said, like the level of hate and the level of evil? Like, when we kill this dude, the world is a better place when this dude leaves it. Does it make the violence easier to go through?
That is a unassuming, remarkably tough question. Um, yes, in some ways, I have we've eliminated people from this world that deserve to be eliminated. There's no doubt about it. Um, because if it even hadn't been us fighting in Iraq, who knows what level of violence or things that they would have done in their home countries, you know? And like you said, you know, people from Africa, you know, coming over there to fight in the jihad. They would have been violent probably no matter what. I don't really, they were probably looking for a cause more than the cause, you know, presented itself. Maybe, maybe not. But so no, you know, I don't lose an ounce of sleep over, you know, moments like that or people like that at all. Um, however, you know, justifying in your mind the fog of war situations that happened, um, you know, kids, bombs, um, you know, even innocent men, you know, just wrong place, wrong time. Um, you know, those are the ones that are tough. Those are the ones that are difficult. And it's hard to justify it. It's hard to justify it. There's levels to that. Okay, like the actions that I've done, the trigger that I pulled. That's one thing. Okay. But you know, and there's one guy that I always think of when I talk about this is a situation, you know, where one of my guys, and because of the intel and everything else in the building that we were hit, hey, you will lead, you know, and upon entry into the building, you will lead with a thermobaric grenade. Um, you know, so made entry into the building and he led with a thermobaric grenade. And it was because of the intel, like it wasn't, you know, just something that we normally did. It was this situation. Well, unfortunately, in that room was, you know, because the men and the women sleep differently. You know, they sleep in different parts of the house. It was full of women and children, and he had to go through that, and that team had to go through that, and the rest of the squad and part of the platoon had to go through that. As we treated casualties and we pulled people out, and you know, people are missing limbs, and little girls are missing limbs, and everything else. You know, we're trying to treat them, we're trying to save lives, and everything else. You know, one that team leader that threw that, you know, he's got to carry that for the rest of his life. But then everybody else that, you know, helped in that situation. And that was my decision.
That is
Oh,
unbelievable. How, you said that you had struggled with some things when we were talking about Josh Wheeler, and Josh's death kind of sparked, kind of an upward trend. I'm assuming these memories in these moments played a role in struggles you had. Is that fair to say?
yeah, absolutely. I
Are
mean,
you willing to discuss to what you're comfortable with, what you did
yeah.
struggle with, and then what steps did you take? Because I hear this a lot, and this is what I think is really important. You know, a lot of people think they're struggling alone, and that's just not
Mhm.
true. I mean, there's dudes from Delta Force who, on the surface, look like the hardest dudes who've ever
Yeah.
walked Earth, but they'll admit, like, I have issues. Like, there's things I think about that still get to them. And so I
Mhm.
think if people hear it from one guy, they start to think, okay, I'm not alone in these feelings, and that helps. So for you personally, what did you struggle with? And then what steps did you take to remedy that?
So first, you know, I'm a very open book kind of guy. I talk about a lot of stuff. Before I dive into that, though, listen, if you're listening to this podcast and this is bringing up some stuff, hey, reach out. Okay, you're not alone. You're not dealing with this stuff alone. Some of the stuff that I've talked about and I'll continue to talk about, we'll pull up previous memories. Um, and you can call me, call me, I'll talk to you. Call David, I don't care. Call somebody, talk to whoever you need to talk to, because that person or I would rather, take that phone call and talk to you about this kind of stuff and get you the help that you need, um, rather than attend your funeral or see your name on the news. Um, we've already lost, you know, tens of thousands of veterans, you know, we continue to lose more every day, and we need to stop that. We need to stop. We're there for each other in these firefights and these missions that I'm talking about, and it doesn't stop there. We need to continue to be. So, so please reach out. But, you know, David, to your point is I'm comfortable talking about this stuff because I've put in the work to deal with it. I won't say that I'm like over it and I'm like good to go. Like, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. Like, I'm in like a little bit in my head right now in this very, very moment, because it's difficult shit to talk about, you know, and it'll never ever go away. It'll never be something that I can be like, that's just stuff that happened. Oh, well, you know, that's war for you. You know, like it doesn't work that way. Um, but, you know, when Josh Wheeler, when I was talking, you know, about that earlier, it was literally everything that came out. It wasn't just the stuff like that I've just talked about. It wasn't just, you know, the war and being in the military and everything else. It's stuff going back all the way to my childhood. I suffered a lot of childhood trauma, a significant amount of childhood trauma. And I'm not going to dive into that. If people want to know about it, they can go back and listen to the, you know, copious amounts of episodes that I've talked about that, and Always in Pursuit and other people's podcasts. I'll try to, you know, spare some time here. But, you know, I had a lot of shit to unpack. I had 30 plus years of things to unpack. And I, um, it all came out like, I feel bad for the chaplain that I talked to because it didn't come out like in one cohesive pattern. I was hopping timelines. I was hopping periods of my life. I was like talking in the third person, first person, second person. Like it was all over the place. And it took years to unpack that. And I didn't do it in the right way. I'm not going to sit here and advise this. I did this while I was continuing to be a first sergeant. I was continuing to deploy. I was continuing to go to the Sergeant Major Academy. Then I was a Sergeant Major over at Second Cavalry Regiment. I was still dealing with that. I was still seeing therapists. I was still getting treatment all this time. Um, the one thing I never did was medication. And I'm not going to sit here and because I'm not a doctor, I'm not going to sit here and try to give advice to that. I just know myself. I know my addictive personality. And the addictive personalities of, you know, my family and everything else. So I just refused to do it. Maybe it would have actually helped and accelerated things and, you know, done a lot of stuff, but it was a lot of talking about things. It was a lot of coming to terms with things. It was a lot of phone calls to people and having very difficult conversations and apologizing for things and talking about things that had happened. It was reliving moments that had been repressed in my mind for decades. Um, and, you know, really kind of exposing my soul to people, you know, that I didn't know, you know, therapists and chaplains and, you know, experts and everything else. And, you know, journaling became a huge thing for me. Writing became a huge thing for me so that I could sit at and I could look at things and I could analyze things. And I'd love to sit here and tell you that I came to like this grand epiphany. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's not one. The best thing I can say is that I've been through all that. I've survived all that. So therefore, I have to live a life of purpose, a life of purpose for my family, a life of purpose for other people. And I've done that through podcasting, and I've done that with a lot of other ventures in my life, so that I can help other people, so they can realize it's okay to have to deal with that stuff. It's okay to have to talk about that stuff, because we're better with you in the world, um, and being a present member of this world. You being, you know, repressed and living a life of darkness is not good for yourself, and it's not good for anybody else. We need you to be an active member of society. The greatest generation coming out of World War II is not just because they beat the Nazis. They're the greatest generation because of what they did after World War II. They changed the economic structure of the entire world, specifically the United States, forever. And veterans of the GWAT and everything else, they're the same. And we've got to work together, and we've got to overcome the struggles. And right now is a great time to do it. I mean, everybody sees what's going on in the world. Like, we have been through hell. So let's work together to overcome that. And maybe it's just your small piece of your pie. okay, is Mike Hall, Sergeant Major Mike Hall, who's somebody that's a great mentor of mine, somebody I respect in the end of the world. You know, just live the Ranger Creed. Sorry, I'm gonna go to Ranger Regiment here for a second, but continue to live the Ranger Creed. You know, really wild display. I'll continue to better myself and better those around me, all these different kind of things, set the example for others to follow, all this different kind of stuff. Do it small, start small, do it for yourself, do it for your family, do it for your community. Like, we need to do this by and large as a veteran community. Yes, we sacrificed, we did things for the betterment of our country, but just because we hung up the uniform doesn't mean that we still don't have that burden. We still have that burden, if nothing else, just for each other. Let's just do it for each other, okay? Because there's still brothers and sisters that are out there that still need you and still want you in this world. I don't give a shit if you've been a piece of shit for 10 years and strung out on drugs and have burned everybody in your family because you've been in a dark, dark place, okay? We still want you in this world. We still need you in this world. But you got to reach out and you got to ask for help, just like you would do on any mission. Give me one, common thing we would say in CQB, give me one, and it mean, you're at the door, you're about to go in, and you need one more guy behind you to go in and do that room clearance. Same kind of thing. So sorry. It's a passionate subject for me.
Well, I think that is very powerful, and I'm gonna clip that whole segment by itself and make sure it's shared. And I love that give me one mindset. And I wanna back up your point you made earlier about like reach out to you. My DMs are open. If someone
Yeah.
hears this and feels like they don't know what to do, I'm certainly not an expert, but I can get you in touch. At a minimum, I'm willing to listen, and I can get you in touch with people who can certainly. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Mike. Like you said, the world is a much better place with you in it. How many years did it take, or maybe it was months, years? If you break your arm, you start seeing progress in X amount of weeks. You're starting to turn a corner. For you, when you started your path of I'm going to try to turn this ship around, how long did it take for you to start seeing progress, noticing changes?
I could actually tell you the exact moment. It's wild. I can. And I honestly, David, I don't know if I've ever shared this. I don't even think I've shared this with my wife. So I'm gonna have to go immediately share this with my wife after this because she'd be pissed if the rest of the world knew about it before she did. I'm in Belgium. Okay. This is 2019. Okay. So this is 5 years after Josh died. Or maybe it's 4. Sorry. Date's a little bit foggy. Okay. And we go to Belgium like a 4-day weekend or something like that. And my wife and I, it was just my wife and I, we'd take like a 4-day weekend. And we had just like a great weekend. Like we had an awesome hotel, like overlooked this square. We had like an awesome dinner. And the next morning, like we had this breakfast and it was just a awesome breakfast, like Belgian waffles, all this like great food and everything else. And we just had like the whole day. Like we didn't have to be anywhere that day. My wife's like, what do you want to do today? We just had an awesome breakfast. We're sitting there drinking coffee, like bomb ass coffee. I'm a coffee guy. Like when I have good coffee, day's right, right? Um, and by the way, Ariel Resupply Company, or a coffee company, veteran company, better than Black Rifle. Try it out. But anyway, sorry, shout out for them. I love Mike. He's a great dude. No politics too. But anyway, and I just remember this like flood of emotion, happiness, and like kind of relief like coming over me that just do whatever the hell I want today. Um, I'm in Belgium with the woman that I love. I'm alive, which is a substantial thing. Um, and I can go do whatever we want today. We can just go explore, we can have fun, we can check out the culture, like we can just do anything. And I was like, and it ties into a point I made earlier that the fact that I'm alive can be enough. The fact that I get to enjoy my life is enough because Josh doesn't get to. Casey Cassavet doesn't get to. Tom Vitagliano, and I can just go down list of names. They don't get to. And I'm so fortunate that I have a woman that loves me. I have kids that are amazing. I have I'm a command sergeant major of an amazing unit, and I get to do really cool things, and I get to impact people in amazing ways daily. Like, it's going to be okay. I just need to keep on putting in the work, talking about things. But then also on top of that, be okay. And this is a big thing, it's a huge thing. Be happy with being happy. It's okay to be happy. I think, and I know me, I used to feel bad about being happy. Enjoying moments, I used to, they actually made me, they actually like put me in a bad mood. Like they would like laughing, like sitting around with a group of people and just laughing and carrying on, doing nothing, literally accomplishing nothing other than just sitting around having a few drinks and just laughing with people. I would feel bad about that. And it would put me in a bad mood. But that's what life's about. It's about enjoying moments, about creating memories. And as a veteran that's been through all the shit that we've been through, like you got to appreciate that because there's so many that just don't get to do that. So the point being is it took me years to get into place, and I still have my moments. I still get in my head about things. And I got to work through them and I got to do stuff. And what I don't do is I don't dive into a bottle. Okay. I don't do that stuff. I'm not sitting there judging anybody that does. But I don't, because I just know it's all it does is suppress. I got to work through that stuff. I got to call my counselor. I got to continue to work through that shit.
I love
Yeah.
it. And I think that people are going to see this, and I think that it is going to have an impact on them. And there's no question, people who are going to see this who might feel like they're alone and isolated, they're going to hear your story, a guy that went to combat many times, a guy that saw a lot of things, dealt with a lot of things. And if you're able to do it, it's a shining example that other people can do it too. So I do appreciate you sharing those stories, and it is honestly inspirational, and I mean that all with all the sincerity in the world. I got just a few more questions for you. You good with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that really fascinates me, and I know fascinates the viewers a lot, is the Rangers' relationship with Delta Force, because they're two. I mean, a lot of guys in Delta Force
Yeah.
came from the Army Rangers, and the units work closely together, and all that stuff. What is, from your perspective, when Army Rangers look at guys in Delta Force, especially young Rangers, guys who maybe been in the Rangers for just a few years, what
Yeah.
is the perception young Army Rangers have of dudes that go to Delta Force?
Yeah, so it's funny because it's morphed over time. So I remember the first time I saw guys in Delta Force. It was actually that same training exercise that I was talking about. That one of the first training exercises that I did with 275. And it was a JRX down in Florida. And I remember we were walking to Chow, and this like box truck pulled up. I think it was like a U-Haul box truck pulled up, and like a couple SUVs like pulled up, and these guys hop out like civilian clothes, and they start taking out like these Pelican cases and all this weird looking gear out of the back of this umbrella, or I'm sorry, umbrella. I said umbrella, U-Haul truck. And I just remember like looking at them, and kind of, I'm just a private. I'm fascinated by who they are. And I remember squad leader, team leaders like, oh, those are the Delta Force guys. Don't look at them. Don't go talk to them. Like they're just they're basically like they're untouchable. Like just stay away from those guys. And I was like, whoa, like what in the hell is going on? Um, so just absolute like fascination with who these people are. But over time, they just became just other guys from another unit. I mean, training exercises we did with them. I mean, literally, from shooting, going through shoot houses with them and training exercises with them. Like I did an entire training event for like 2 weeks with Greg Birch, who's like this mythical Ranger leader and Delta Force guy that everybody talks about. At the time, I didn't know who he was. I was just a team leader, and he was just like he's probably like I don't know. He was probably just a team sergeant major. I don't remember who he was, but or what position he had at the time. But we just like did this like 2 week training event, this advanced marksmanship training event that they came out to like teach us, and it was a bunch of guys from Delta Force. We just did this training event, and then like by the end, they're like, hey, they're just like us. They just have more training. They've been doing this longer. They're more focused. They're more disciplined. They obviously have a selection that you know, continues to add to the level of separation and the caliber of individuals. Then you take deployments. I mean, man, I got story after story of sitting there just toe to toe, clearing rooms, clearing freaking palm groves, you know, freaking dragging guys out of Humvees and helicopters and everything else, and watching Delta Force guys bust their ass and us sitting there laughing at them, you know, like. I mean, I literally remember one, you know, this cool, you know, this guy, and he was kind of an arrogant guy. You know, he's sitting there, you know, trying to be all cool guy, like hop across this freaking ditch, and he totally his back foot slipped and he lands in the ditch. And you know, and I tell two of my guys like, hey, go get him out, you know, because he couldn't like get out because the water was too deep and everything else, and they like fish him out. And I remember like standing right next to me was you know, the squadron, not the squadron CSM. It was probably the troop CSM. And I was like, I guess Delta Force guys can fall into the shit too. And he's like, yep, you'd be surprised. You know, and you know, I mean, they just became like, and you know, in the initial days of the GWAT, Rangers were literally like pulling security and like BPs and everything for, you know, all the unit members, you know, and it was, to be honest with you, it was rightfully so, because we weren't as serious about the type of training that needed to happen, you know, back then, you know. But then as GWAT went on and we did training rotations, we became hyper focused on the things that we needed to do in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we got better. We got better equipment, we got better trained. We also started to realize, hey, some guys, just because they're Rangers doesn't mean guys that we're going to take on target. So we would make them drive the vehicles and stuff like that, because we're like, hey, these are not the guys that we want, you know, going through the you know, through the house and everything else. They're great guys, they're great Rangers and everything else, but they're not, you know, where we need them to be for some of this, um, you know, highly visible targets and everything else, just because they're not where they need to be. You know, so as time went on, it just, hey, we're just, you know, and then, you know, you talk about Stan McChrystal, you know, General McChrystal, he really kind of, he was the guy that added, you know, the accelerant into that, because he was like, we need to pressure the networks. Therefore, we need more strike forces. Therefore, the Rangers are no longer in a support role. The Rangers are their standalone strike forces. So now it's just us hitting targets, them hitting targets, you know, and the British and, you know, whoever, you know, Australians eventually too. Like, you know, they're all their special operations units and us. And we're not in support roles anymore. We're all just doing stuff, you know, literally looking across, you know, the block, and you're like, hey, you know, and you're waving at a, you know, a British guy, a freaking, you know, the SF, I can't remember the SF's direct action unit. I can't remember their name, but you know, whoever it was, you know, um, over time it very de-glamorized. And then obviously most of my best friends that I grew up with in the 75th Ranger Regiment, you know, they've been in Delta for, you know, I was just there for a retirement of one of my best friends, you know, a couple months ago, you know, I mean, so it just kind of becomes the thing. And eventually, you know, I even took the long walk, you know, and unfortunately I wasn't successful, but so you became more comfortable. You realize they're not quite as special, but at the same time, I will say, you know, anybody that has taken the long walk or, you know, didn't, you know, they still, don't get me wrong, like have a level of admiration, because obviously they did something that we weren't able to do, and they are above a level that we're at. And you have to be humble enough to realize that. I went, didn't make it, therefore they're better than
Well, don't sell yourself short. Come on now. Don't do that.
I mean, you got to admit it, you know. I mean, obviously they had something I didn't. So
Was there one thing that slipped you up in selection that kind of was what did it
yeah,
for you?
yeah. Honestly, it was just it was one thing, and it was just feet care. I just got to a point where I literally just couldn't even walk on my feet, and you know, but that even within itself is a fucking excuse. I mean, there's guys that finished with broken legs and ankles, and they still made it. You know, so you know, combined with that with some things that I was in my head about at the time, you know, I didn't make the time. So got cut right before the 40, you know, so just happens. It's
But you
okay,
gave
you know,
but
but to be honest with you, and I've talked about this, sorry, I'm glad that it didn't happen, because things that have happened since then, I'm glad they happened, and I'm glad that my life ended the way it did. So it would have been cool, but it's life.
and you
And
gave it a shot, and that's, you know, that's super. I got two questions left for you. You were talking right away at the start of this podcast about speaking out, guys sharing stories, how that really, a lot of guys from World War II or maybe Korea, they didn't really talk about it. Obviously, you have a podcast. You're on a podcast right now. There's several other podcasts. You can go on YouTube. There is a bit of a debate, especially in the tier 1 community, about whether or not it's appropriate for veterans from those units to do podcasts. There's been a lot of issues. I can tell you more about it when we turn the camera off. But do you feel that, where do you think the line should be drawn? Like, you've been a little coy about things in this interview. I have no issue with that. I totally get it. Some people, they'll say, I mean, they don't hold anything back, and it can cause serious issues. So for you, where is the line?
So the first hard line is just talking about anything that could jeopardize current people in harm's way. Talking about TTPs, tactics, things that we do. Well, okay, you can make the argument, well, I could go and I could Google them and I could find them. Okay, fine. But reading something or reading about something is very different than somebody talking about it and the procedures that go into it, the backstory behind it. Like, there's no point in talking about that stuff. Like, there's just not. It just sounds cool and it makes us sound cool. I mean, I could sit here and I could talk about, how and why and the way and the things we used to do when we were hunting foreign fighters. But other than, it just sounded really cool and people going, man, that is so cool. And I love hearing that and everything else. Like, there's no point in doing it. I mean, all it does is it's just trying to, add volume or not add value. It's adding value to get people to dial into the podcast or the book or whatever it is, because you're displaying that level of detail that people just want to know. But there's a reason they don't know. There's a reason. We don't need to talk about it. So that's a hard line. And the second hard line is, and this is just a personal feeling. I mean, and there's a lot of different aspects. I don't tell war stories to just tell war stories. I've told war stories throughout this episode because we were talking about something and then it just led into something else. I didn't come out of the gate saying, let me tell you about this time where I almost died or we killed all these people. Like, I did. And the reason I say that is because you can't, when you do it blindly like that, you're also causing effects that you just don't realize. And that's why before I really kind of got into some stuff, I threw out a disclaimer. Hey, the things I'm about to talk about, some of the stuff that I've already talked about, it's gonna unnerve some people. It's gonna make you think about some things that maybe you haven't thought about. So therefore, if you're struggling, the things I'm talking about, they make you feel a certain way, please go talk to somebody. But if you just blindly talk about them without an appreciation for the impact that it's going to have on the audience, you are being selfish. You're just being selfish, is my opinion. So I know there's a lot of stuff that's out there, and I'm very familiar with it as well. And I've had people that have come on my pod or that have refused to come on the podcast because they think of something like that. And I try to explain it to them, and I'm successful, in some ways I'm not, and that's okay. But my point is we can still have meaningful conversations and talk about history, very, very important history. It's our life history that people are going to want to know. I mean, how many times have you heard some World War II, World War I, Korean War or veteran or Vietnam veterans, kid say, my dad never talked about that stuff.
All the time.
Right? But they would love to. They would love to know. Well, guess what? I don't sit around and tell my kids war stories either. Okay. But guess what? They can hear about some of the stuff their dad does, and they'll probably wait till I'm dead because, that's just how kids are. But, maybe when I'm dead, they're going to be like, well, and now it's going to be there. And now they can hear about it, and now they'll have maybe a little bit of appreciation that, oh, well, maybe dad was a dick about some of this stuff because dad saw some shit.
Fair enough. No, I think that's good. Well, off that, Do you have an opinion on, like, I know if you go on Instagram or YouTube, there's like a whole industry now, former operators that teach
Yeah.
tactics. And it's like, here's how we stack up. Like, guys from SEAL Team 6 have
Yeah.
massive followings, and it's literally YouTube videos of like, here's how we stack up on a door, here's how we breach the door, here's how you flood the room. I've always saw that. I mean, I think it's cool. I'm not gonna lie. I
Yeah.
think it's
Yeah.
cool.
Absolutely.
But I always watch those videos and I think to myself, if I was a bad guy, why wouldn't I just sit all day and just watch these and try to figure out what these guys are doing?
Yeah.
That to me has been very confusing, and I'm surprised. I guess it's obviously not illegal, but I'm surprised by how common that has become.
Mm-hmm. Make it even more real is, who do you think trains the SWAT teams in the United States of America?
Former operators.
Exactly. And here you are showing some shitbag drug dealer how we do, call outs, and we do this different stuff. And, you see it all the time, SWAT teams doing stuff and getting shot and everything else because, I mean, what can they really do with it? I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. But at the end of the day, it just goes back into, why are they doing it? What educational value is that for the common person? The common person just needs to know how to handle a gun, defend themselves in a situation. Okay. That, whatever situation they find themselves in, do they need to know how to clear a room? Well, you got the airsofters, you got these. I don't give a shit if they know how to do that right. I don't care. I could give two shits if an airsofter knows how pie a door to make sure that I don't get shot, on the other side of the door before I make it. Like, I don't care. Like, and there's no value in a common person knowing that. There's only bad things that can happen from that. And that's terrorist, ill state actors, people, in the United States of America, that, for SWAT teams and everything. Like, there's only bad that can come from putting that stuff out there. And the funny part is most of those guys that are probably teaching that stuff were super, super irrelevant in their time in service. Okay. I just was having this conversation, and this is not a SEAL bashing kind of thing, but just because a guy's a Navy SEAL, like, doesn't mean that he was in SEAL Team 6 rescuing Osama or killing Osama bin Laden.
Right.
I'm sorry. Okay. Like, he wasn't. Okay. The average SEAL was not. And they're great things, and they've done great things. And I'm proud they're, Americans and all this stuff. But for people listening, be very careful of who you're listening to and the credentials. Just because they were a Navy SEAL or an Army Ranger doesn't mean that they were super relevant during their time in service, and that they were, running and gunning, and doing unbelievable things, in their time in service.
I'm smiling because there are stories that could be shared that I won't get into. But
Yeah.
you are 1,000% correct with the statement you just made. And I would encourage everyone to be very careful. Just because someone claims something on Instagram or YouTube does not mean it's necessarily true. I'll leave it at that. Last question. This is a fun one. It is kind of an interesting segue, talking about training and stuff. As the viewers know, I keep a Red Dawn DVD right over my shoulder in the background of the set. It's my favorite movie. I probably watched it too young the first time, but I fell in love with it right away. If Red Dawn were to happen, what to you would be the best Red Dawn strategy if the U.S. got invaded by Russia, China, whoever it could be? What would you advise people on?
It's what's funny about it is how dumb would you be to invade the United States of America? Okay. First, you'd waste a lot of your bullets on the dumbasses, that would probably come out there and try to, sue for peace. But the people that didn't, the people that have the arms rooms in their houses and have contingency plans and setups and everything else, yeah, good luck with that. There's more guns in this country. There's probably more automatic guns in this country than there are Americans. So have fun. But I would, the community and everything else, and the people that I know that live in this area, like, those are the people I'm calling, rallying on me. I live on land. Like, this is a perfect place. This is where we're going to make our stand. And this is where we're going to all rally and converge, because there's a lot of Rangers. There's a lot of Delta. There's some few Navy SEALs. I suppose we'll let them in. They can bake us cookies, you know, and SF guys and everything else, that, you know, I would tell, hey, this is where we're going and this is what we're doing. And let's have some fun and let's do what we do best.
I love it. Mike, could you tell the viewers real quick where they can find you on Instagram, your podcast, anywhere else on the internet they can, if they want more information about Mike Burke?
Yeah. So, one, I appreciate you having me on again, David. It's been a lot of fun. I know we talked about some deep stuff too, but yeah, people first, you know, so I run a podcast as well. It's called Legends of the 75th. It's a little bit more focused, just because I have, you know, it's honestly just because I spend a lot of time there, but it allows me to be very specific with what I do and what I talk about. You can find it on Patreon, Legends of the 75th, but you can find me on Instagram, Michael S. Burke. TikTok, I think we're on TikTok as well. Michael S. Burke, Facebook, you know, and LinkedIn and everything else. You can find us all there. But and then you can also just, if you want, you can shoot an email to me, Mike at legendsofthe75th.com.
Well, Mike, I hang out real quick when I kill this recording, but I do want to say thank you very much. And maybe in a year or so, 18 months, we circle back, we find some new topics, and we do this again.
I look forward to it.